Nick Shirley and a couple more people. One of them was an investigator that they just kind of made it so hard that he couldn't do his job. When I say they, I mean the Democrats and the other government officials. But you'll notice that I cut out a lot of the Democrats speaking, the ones that wanted to use this time to bash Trump and totally get off of subject. This is not a time to bash Trump. This is a time for people to be held accountable. And it just so happens that the majority of it is Somalians, so nobody's being racist. You know, this Nick Shirley gentleman, he's a young guy, I think he's mid-20s, maybe 24. And he pretty much put his life on the line. His family is in jeopardy too. They've been threatening him, and he's had to beef up security and everything. If he were my son, I would be proud for standing for something. There's no reason that I can think of other than guilt, or not guilt, well, yeah, guilt, for the things that they're doing and saying about him. They're just trying to do a smoke screen per se. This is, famous Democrat BS. Let's just throw up mirrors and smoke, and maybe they won't pay attention to what really is the problem. But let's start with the video.
Where's the money's going?
Attorney General Keeley, and that was keeping these folks in business.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning.
What happened here in Minnesota that allowed this fraud to materialize?
The people at the highest levels of responsibility in the government of the state of Minnesota looked the other way.
Fraud within these programs have involved false claims, fictitious providers, and services not rendered, highlighting the need for stronger verification, monitoring, and enforcement to protect taxpayer funds. These fraudulent actions have robbed taxpayer funds intended to feed children, support individuals with autism, provide housing for low-income and disabled Americans, and deliver health care to Medicaid recipients. Since 2021, the DOJ has charged 98 defendants in Minnesota-based fraud cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. Of the 98 defendants, 64 have been convicted. DOJ has now undertaken extensive investigative action, which includes issuing over 1,750 subpoenas, executing more than 130 search warrants, and conducting more than 1,000 witness interviews. Since the start of the Trump administration, the federal response to fraud in Minnesota has intensified, following a series of high-profile cases involving state-administered, federally funded programs. One of the initial instances of high-profile fraud in the state involved the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, which was at the center of a $250 million COVID-19-related fraud scheme. As part of the scheme, fraudsters exploited Department of Agriculture, USDA food programs designed to provide meals for children. Federal prosecutors ultimately convicted 57 defendants and described the scheme as the nation's largest COVID-era fraud. The issue gained renewed national attention in late December 2025 following a widely shared YouTube video posted by one of our witnesses, Mr. Nick Shirley. Mr. Shirley's work highlighted suspected fraud in Minnesota child care programs. His reporting prompted federal authorities to intensify investigations, expand oversight, and coordinate multi-agency enforcement efforts. A week ago today, Mr. Shirley released a second video that documented alleged fraud in the transportation industry intended to provide rides for children, the disabled, and the elderly. Mr. Shirley uncovered companies with questionable addresses and vehicles intended to transport children, the disabled, and the elderly that remained idle for extended periods of time. We look forward to hearing from Mr. Shirley about what he was able to uncover. But how did we get here? Hopefully another witness, Scott Dexter, a former fraud investigator for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, can shed some light on that for us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this massive wave of fraudulent activity didn't just have the consequence of ripping off taxpayers. It has drastically impacted legitimate organizations that are truly helping their neighbors. Jennifer Larson is here today to share her story about how this massive fraud has crippled her organization that serves autistic children. We'd like to think that these fraudsters will one day face justice, but it appears that is not always the case. For example, Yasmin Ali, a daycare and home healthcare owner charged with stealing millions from Minnesota taxpayers, after being granted bail, disappeared before a trial and has not been located since. That was more than a decade ago. The tentacles of this fraud ring are widespread and include crimes other than fraud. For example, the aforementioned Yasmin Ali. Her brother, Adaris Abdullah Ali, pleaded guilty in 2009 to lying to a federal grand jury about his knowledge of a group of young Somali men in Minneapolis who traveled to Somalia to fight with Al-Shabaab, a foreign terrorist organization against the transitional federal government of Somalia. We can also consider the fact that at least $700 million in U.S. cash transported via passenger luggage through Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The incidents are all currently under federal investigation, with the majority carried by couriers traveling to Somalia, other African nations, and the Middle East. While no definitive links to funding terrorism have been established yet, we know that hundreds of millions of dollars in cash are being transported to areas where foreign terrorist organizations are active. What could possibly go wrong? A whistleblower has alleged that TSA personnel at MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, repeatedly identified and flagged routine encounters with Somali men carrying large suitcases filled with bundled cash, often exceeding $1 million. During an interview, a former TSA agent at MSP from 2016 to 2021, now a whistleblower, Liz Jackson, noted that she saw, quote, suitcases packed with millions of dollars in cash moving through MSP again and again, carried by the same type of couriers, which raised questions that she feels law enforcement and political leaders still haven't answered, close quote. Jackson further explained her repeated encounters with Somali men carrying suitcases packed with cash, and in one case, a bag filled with new passports. According to Jackson, the volume, consistency, and profile of the transactions she witnessed were well beyond ordinary or everyday behavior. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has noted that the department is currently investigating where Minnesota's taxpayer dollars are being placed. Additional reports show that Somali individuals in the United States send roughly $215 million abroad each year. On January 9th, Secretary Bessent indicated that the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, informed 4 money transfer organizations that they're under investigation for their roles in the fraud scheme involving the theft of funds from social services in Minnesota. He also indicated that some banks in Minnesota are being investigated by the Internal Revenue Service's Civil Enforcement Division for allegations related to money laundering. As you can see, there's much to unpack surrounding these numerous fraud schemes taking place in and around Minneapolis, Minnesota. I would be remiss if I didn't suggest and urge additional investigation throughout this entire country. I know that in my home state of Arizona, our Democrat Attorney General came in to office and quickly said that there had been $2.5 million in fraud just in the Medicaid program alone, and in recent studies released over the last year in Arizona, it's been suggested that as much as $7.2 billion in fraud annually take place in Arizona's similar programs. So this is not just a Minnesota issue, but it just happens to be at the forefront of why we're here today. I look forward to today's hearing, and I thank the members and witnesses for taking part. Now yield back and recognize the ranking member, Ms. McBath, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
So this will be one of them that I cut. Another Trump basher, another Democrat trying to distract. So did you hear what he said though? This has spawned a national investigation. Other states like Maine, I think Massachusetts, Ohio, California, they're all getting in on it, and they say California is going to be like, make this one look like small fries, and this is, I think this one ended up being around 9 billion. Some people said 18 billion, but I hadn't seen the facts. So I'm curious to see exactly how much in the end. But, yeah, let me get rid of her. I personally don't want to hear anything that right now the Democrats have to say. There's only one or two. Okay, I'll give them 5 or 6. 5 or 6 that are honest and not on the take. So I'll listen to those people, but until they get this party rebuilt, I don't want to hear nothing you gotta say, because every time you open your mouth, it's a lie or something to form a picture of what you want it to be. But it's like you can put lipstick on a monkey, but they're still not a beauty queen. You know what I'm saying? So, and I want to also add this. You mean to tell me that the government, our government, who knows every dime I make sure they get their part on the taxes, didn't have something in place to where billions of dollars got gone? Come on, man. So that tells me that as long as you got your slaves bringing in the money, you don't care. I'm very disappointed in the government. Very. I'm honestly tired of being your slave, so you can live high on the hog and give our money to people that don't even deserve it. Somalians don't. They've barely put anything in. They've come over here on welfare. Ilhan Omar had less than $100 in the bank, I think, and now she's got 30 million. Come on, man. Did you hear what I said? She went from 0 to 30 million in a matter of maybe 1 or 2 years. Come on.
This hearing, and I thank the members and witnesses for taking part. Now yield back and recognize the ranking member, Ms. McBath, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for convening this hearing.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. Estimates are potentially as high as $9 billion we're looking at here, and what appears to be a decade-long scam, fraud. I mean, I always look at one program I talked about a couple weeks ago at an oversight hearing. Was this
$9 billion.
where taking federal Americans' hard-earned tax dollars, taking that money and supposedly providing meals to children. Problem was there were no meals and no kids. They're just stuffing it in their pockets. So I think this is a great hearing to have. We appreciate the witnesses and the work that they've done. Ms. Larson and the work she does and actually making a difference, doing a legitimate program. Mr. Shirley for uncovering this, and Mr. Dexter and others who are here. So with that, I would yield back and look forward to hearing from our witnesses and the hearing itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize myself for just some UCs. The first one is President Joe Biden commutes sentences for 2 of Chicago area's most notorious fraudsters. North Dakota judge blasts Biden for setting fraudsters free. Biden commutes roughly 1,500 sentences, pardons 39 in biggest single-day act of clemency, including fraudsters. Illinois lawmakers furious after Biden commutes sentences of state fraudsters. Without objection. And now,
Mr. Chairman, could I enter some as well?
yeah, please.
Thank you much. This UC request is from ABC News.
So this is one of the turd busters that I'm going to block. He gets on my last nerve, and he's one of them Democrats I despise. And look at that little smile on her face, like, oh yeah, we got ours. They just had to put that in there, of course. Let's bash Trump a little bit and try to distract from our thieving selves.
assistance fraud scheme. And finally, a Minnesota fraud scheme timeline from NPR News. Fraud investigation stretched across Wells's tenure.
Without objection. And now, without objection, all of the opening statements will be included in the record, and we will introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Scott Dexter. Mr. Dexter is a former law enforcement officer, having served for 28 years. He also served with the Minnesota Department of Human Services Office of Inspector General, where he investigated fraud in the Child Care Assistance Program. Thank you, Mr. Dexter, for being here. And Ms. Jennifer Larson. Ms. Larson is the founder and chief executive officer of the Holland Center for Autism, a clinic that provides services to children and young adults with autism. She started the Holland Center to serve families like hers that were not receiving adequate services and support elsewhere. Thank you, Ms. Larson, for being here today. Mr. Nick Shirley is an independent journalist. His recent investigations and videos have shed light on the scale of fraud in public benefit programs in Minnesota that are currently ongoing. And thank you, Mr. Shirley, for being here. And Mr. Dylan Hetler-Gaudet. Mr. Hetler-Gaudet is the acting vice president of policy and government affairs at the Project on Government Oversight. POGO is a nonprofit organization that investigates alleged wrongdoing by the government.
Not sure why he has glasses on. Maybe he's blind, or maybe he's in disguise. I'm not really sure about him.
Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you. Thank you. You may be seated. The record will reflect that the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. And at the instruction of Mr. Hetler-Gaudet, I wanted to let all members of the panel know that when you have a question for him, please say his name so he knows that you are addressing him, please. I want the witnesses to know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we'll begin now with Mr. Dexter. You are recognized for your 5-minute statement.
Thank you. Chair, members of the community, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Scott Dexter. I'm a retired law enforcement investigator with 28 years of experience, most of it spent conducting criminal and financial fraud investigations, with experience in surveillance operations. In 2013, after retiring from law enforcement, I joined the Minnesota Department of Human Services as part of a newly created investigative unit within the Office of Inspector General. Our mission was straightforward: identify and investigate fraud within the Child Care Assistance Program, known as CCAP. I was one of the original 4 investigators hired, all of us former law enforcement professionals with backgrounds in criminal investigations. Our cases were not selected based on the name of the center, the owner, or the community it served. They were selected based solely on tips, complaints, and the amount of CCAP funding being paid out. The highest funded centers were reviewed first, and many of those centers were referred to us through the public tip line or by licensing inspectors who observed activity inconsistent with a legitimate daycare operation. What we found was deeply concerning. Many of these centers operated out of commercial spaces with windows totally covered, no visible play areas, and very few children ever present. Through surveillance, data collection, and review of attendance and billing records, we repeatedly documented patterns of overbilling, non-existent attendance, and in some cases, children being signed in for hours they were never actually at the center. Our investigative process was thorough and methodical. We collected licensing and billing data, installed covert surveillance cameras, reviewed hours of video, identified parents and employees, and calculated estimated overpayments based on actual attendance. Completed cases were then turned over to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension for search warrants, interviews, arrests, and potential prosecution. As our investigations progressed, we noticed a trend. Many of the centers receiving the highest levels of CCAP funding were owned and operated by Somali individuals, and the families served were predominantly Somali. This was not the basis for selecting cases, but it did become the basis for accusations against us. We were labeled as racially biased, despite the fact that our case selection was driven entirely by funding data. An outside review was launched into our investigative practices. We were questioned about how we selected centers and how we conducted surveillance. Following
this is what they do. They scream racism to get people to back off. This guy wouldn't have backed off, but a politician will, because at that point you're going to lose a vote, and that affects your cash cow. They got to do something about these politicians, man.
That review, new restrictions were placed on our work, including mandatory panel reviews before we could move forward with investigations. Investigators were also pulled from conducting new or current investigations in order to enter data from all previous complaints received by DHS into a newly created database, a process that took nearly a year to complete. These changes significantly hindered our ability to do our jobs effectively. Ultimately, in 2019, I chose to retire because the investigative process had become so constrained that meaningful work was no longer possible. Through collaboration with federal agencies, including the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, we learned that millions of dollars in cash from the Somali community was being flown out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport by Somali couriers. At one point, nearly $70 million had been documented leaving the country halfway through a single year. Although we could not prove that the cash was obtained.
So 70 million, and that was back 2018 and 19. So they had 6, 7 more years, and they probably doubled up on that. Yeah, Obama, I blame you. You brought these people over here, and I think you probably knew what you were doing.
Fraudulently, we strongly suspected that it was. We also encountered situations where federal partners were prevented from opening cases due to concerns about political sensitivities surrounding the Somali community and the refugee resettlement program. These decisions had real consequences, allowing fraud to continue unchecked. Throughout our work, we identified several loopholes that made CCAP highly vulnerable to fraud. Centers were allowed to bill for the full authorized hours, even when children were present for only minutes. Billing records could be submitted up to 30 days later, creating opportunities for manipulation. Attendance records were handwritten, unreliable, and often incomplete. And despite our recommendations, no biometric attendance systems, no electronic submission requirements, and no state-installed security cameras were ever implemented. Chair and members, the purpose of my
That biometrics system and the database that it would have helped keep up with and create would have at least cut it in half. But they got in his way and wouldn't let him do it. I mean, I'd rather my tax money go for that to keep them legit than to Somalia warlord. Just saying.
testimony is not to cast blame on any community. It is to highlight systemic weaknesses that allowed large-scale fraud to occur and to emphasize the need for stronger safeguards, better oversight, and investigative processes that are allowed to function without political interference. Thank you for your time and your commitment to ensuring accountability within publicly funded programs. And I am prepared to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dexter. And now we're going to recognize Mr. Hetler-Gaudet for your 5 minutes of opening statement.
Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member McBath, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today on the important issues of preventing fraud and protecting taxpayer dollars. My name is Dylan Hetler-Gaudet, and I am the Acting Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight. We are a nonpartisan, independent watchdog that promotes a more accountable, transparent, and effective federal government. We view it as our mission to combat abuse of power and corruption in the federal government, which includes working on rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. The unfortunate truth is that fraud in government programs is a fact of life. Since the United States government has existed, fraud in government has also existed. Or much longer than that, in fact. For as long as human beings have been organizing ourselves into societies and building institutions to govern those societies, there have always been those who will seek to take advantage. This is a harsh but real truth related to the human condition related to our fundamentally fallen and flawed natures. That said, it is still incumbent upon every one of us to do what we can to prevent fraud and to hold perpetrators of fraud accountable. This is especially true when the fraud implicates hard-earned taxpayer dollars and critical public programs and services. This is true whether we're talking about fraud in the context of the Feeding Our Future program or any other program in Minnesota, whether we're talking about welfare fraud in Mississippi, which involved the participation of a world-famous Hall of Fame NFL quarterback. This is true whether we're talking about fraud in the context of it being perpetrated by large multinational defense companies in the context of multi-billion-dollar contract they have with the Defense Department. The point here is that fraud and the abuse of taxpayer dollars is not related to any particular geographic, demographic, or other boundary or characteristic. So why do these things happen so much? Mostly they are caused by deep structural flaws, gaps, and weaknesses in our system of government. They're also driven by recalcitrance and resistance to change on the part of federal agencies. To put it shortly, fraud is a systemic problem and it requires systemic solutions. So what are these solutions? I'm pleased to share a few of them with you today. We must first look at watchdogs, critical sources of information, and practitioners of oversight from within the federal government itself. I'm specifically talking about inspectors general, the Government Accountability Office, and whistleblowers. Rather than attacking, firing, undermining, and intimidating these individuals and entities as this administration and its allies have done, we must strengthen, preserve, and protect them. We must enact reforms to make sure that IGs and GAO can perform their duties effectively and independently, and we must add additional safeguards to make sure that whistleblowers can blow the whistle without fear of reprisal or retaliation. We must also take a long, hard look at the architecture currently in place for how we track, monitor, analyze, and assess federal funding. To put it bluntly, that architecture is broken. Key resources like USAspending.gov are in desperate need of overhaul and modernization. We need to enhance and improve the quantity, quality, timeliness, and integrity of the data and information we collect on federal funding.
In other words, quit fighting change. It's inevitable.
If we don't do this, we will never have a good grasp on where funding is going, where it's ending up, who is being helped by it, who is being missed by it, and what the ultimate impact is. Lastly, we must enact robust reforms and vigorous enforcement to crack down on corruption, cronyism, and conflicts of interest, which turbocharge waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. The presidential pardon is an acute example of.
Aren't you glad that God, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, is not afraid of change? After all, He wouldn't give us a new day, a way to turn from our sins.
With each of the last two administrations using the pardon power inappropriately to pardon convicted fraudsters. We must also promote reforms to crack down on the revolving door between agencies and industries and to head off pay-to-play politics, all of which distort and corrupt decisions like the award of federal contracts. The takeaway here is simple. Focusing on individuals' salacious, scandalous examples of fraud is akin to looking at the symptoms and not looking at the disease or the root causes of the disease. The Project on Government Oversight stands ready, willing, and able to work with anyone here who wants to work on root causes and systemic solutions so that we can actually get our hands around waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption in the federal government. Thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hedley. And I forgot to mention, when you get about 10 seconds left, I'll just tip that so everybody will know that as well. So, Mr. Shirley, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Fraud did not occur. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Mr. Dexter, could have something been done about this earlier?
Yes, as I stated, we had
Dexter.
Well, the fact that part of our job was to go and collect attendance records, we would find.
I just want to let you know why I went past Nick Shirley. if you've been following it at all, you've probably seen it 1,000 times. So we know of his character, and we know what he did. That's why. Nothing personal.
Attendance records that were either incomplete, non-existent. Obviously, there were times we found them to be fabricated because they were given to us way later, and the same with billing records. They were allowed 30 days after the end of the billing period to submit billing records, so they were not immediately available to us, and it kind of allowed overpayments or double payments to be overlooked. So we had the attendance record issue. We had the fact that there was no way to verify who was signing the children in and out, no way to verify what times.
So what he's saying is, what I'm hearing is there were guidelines per se that were in place that opened up the opportunity for the fraud to take place. Nobody held accountable, no facts, no proof of students or whatever.
Those children were signed in and out.
Cutting a follow up here. In Wisconsin, we learned this month that Ibrahima Diop, a Minneapolis school finance boss, placed on leave for failing to submit required financial paperwork with the Minneapolis school district and for signing questionable contracts linked to the Somali fraud scandal, was hired by the Milwaukee public school system as a deputy superintendent at a salary of $240,000 a year. Do you think it wise? Might that be a warning sign that this person was involved, may have been involved with fraud in Minneapolis? Shouldn't they be concerned in Wisconsin that that they're hiring someone like that?
Well, if somebody that they hire has a past history and practice of doing that type of stuff, I would be very leery of it occurring again, or that being the basis that they're hired.
So Governor Evers refused to open the books and is blocking federal audits of our food stamp and Medicaid programs. And he also vetoed 4 auditor positions in a recent budget. Do you think that is also a warning sign?
Yes, if it's preventing...
Or ill-advised, would that be a better way to pose the question?
Yeah, if it prevents the oversight and the ability to audit and look at the records to make sure it can have a check and balance system, I think that'd be very unwise, because again, that allows fraud to occur.
Because, Mr. Shirley, what is happening in Minnesota, it could be happening throughout the United States. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
If there's one thing we've learned or leered, as they say in Minneapolis, isn't it possible that this is happening everywhere?
Yes, I believe it is.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the ranking member of the whole committee, Mr. Raskin, for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank all the witnesses for your excellent testimony. Mr. Hedler-Gaudet, the administration has systematically undermined government oversight.
You get tips and complaints, whistleblowers or others come to you and tell you something's not right at these child care centers in your state that are getting all kinds of taxpayer money. Is that right? That's how it started?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you go and do your work. And you got 28 years experience investigating things, and specifically in the crime and financial fraud area. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you go out and find out these child care centers, there aren't any kids. No kids are there. I mean, there's some, but there's you don't see the playground. You don't see any kids at a place where they're supposed to be helping children. And then you also find out most of them are run by Somali individuals. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
And then you make some recommendations. You said, here's what we should do. I think you put this on page 2 of your testimony. You said there's some basic things you should do. No, you said they didn't have biometric attendance system. They should do that. They should have electronic submission requirements. They need security cameras. You made some recommendations.
Yes.
And then what happened?
Nothing.
They ignored your recommendations, but it didn't stop there, did it? They ignored your recommendations, they called you a racist, right?
Correct.
Typical left. I always say the left will tell a lie, big media will report it, you tell the truth, they call you racist. Exactly what happened here. So they ignore your recommendations, they call you a racist, but it even got worse than that. If you can imagine, they started investigating you, is that right?
Yes, we were interviewed by an outside firm for a report given to the Office of Legislative Auditor.
And what did that report look like? What did they say? They call you a racist? What did the report say?
The report basically questioned our investigative tactics, looked at how our unit was managed.
Even though you had 28 years experience in this particular area, tips and whistleblowers came to you, even though that was the whole catalyst for doing this.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And the end result is what? The end result is Miss Larson, who's actually helping people, she
Correct.
suffers and the people she helps suffers. Is that right, Miss Larson? Not to mention the fact that taxpayers are getting ripped off, but the people who do good work, who actually help people, you suffered.
The disabled are paying for the money stolen.
Yeah. And why do you think all this is the case? So, I mean, all this brings me to the
I hope you're proud, Mr. Governor of Minnesota, Mr. City Mayor, and the rest of you Democrats.
Someone's got to ask, well, why did they not follow your recommendations, call you a racist, investigate you instead of just fixing the problem? Why'd they do that? What could be the answer? Anyone want to hazard Mr. Shirley, you want to hazard a guess why that's the case?
Well, they simply use that as a deflection technique to make you not want to speak out against the fraud.
Yeah, it seems to me it's politics, though. You think it's politics, Mr. Dexter?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, the people at the top like, well, we don't want to do this. We don't want to be called racist. In fact, we found that out a week ago in a hearing where we were looking at this Feeding Our Future program. And we found out they actually shut that program off for a while. They said, time out, something's not right here. They found the same kind of things you found, Mr. Dexter. And they said, we're going to stop payment. And then it restarted. And the reason it restarted is because they threatened a racial discrimination lawsuit against the authorities there in Minnesota. So, okay, forget about the fact that when we do this, we restart the money, we're going to hurt good people like Miss Larson and the people she helps and rip off the taxpayers. We're going to do it all for politics. And we also found, interestingly enough, the Attorney General in Minnesota had a meeting with the key folks in this particular program, and then they find out a couple weeks later they start sending in campaign contributions. I think it's politics. I think it's politics driving it all. And that's why it's appropriate we're investigating here at the congressional level. That's why it's appropriate the Department of Justice has put in place a specific individual to focus on this, not only in Minnesota, but around the country. I talk too much. Anyone else want to throw on? I'll give you, Mr. Shirley, Ms. Larson, a chance to say anything if you want. If not, I'll yield 28 seconds to our chairman. I yield 20 seconds, the remaining of my time to the chairman.
Thank you. So, Mr. Hedler-Godet, would it surprise you that Joe Biden issued pardons to someone named Crundell, who had the largest municipal fraud in the country's history and had a restitution amount of $53.7 million that was never paid following the commutation? Would that surprise you, sir?
That would not surprise me. And actually, in my written statement, I outlined how some pardons under the last administration, the Biden administration, they also fall into the same pattern of pardoning convicted fraudsters. So I'm in agreement with you there.
Yeah, thank you. And without objection, that time has expired. So without objection, Mr. Klein will be permitted to participate in today's hearing for the purpose of questioning the witness if a member yields him time for that purpose. And now we're going to go to Mr. Moore from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All this talk about pardons and the ultimate shyster, one of them was Hunter Biden. He got pardoned after Joe promised he wasn't going to do that on the way out. So anyway, that's another pardon for another day. Ms. Larson, I'm impressed with your son. I honestly thought he was your attorney when you guys were sitting there. But were there early warning signs, if acted on, that could have prevented the fraud schemes from growing to the scale that we see now?
I'd say yes. Looking back, the Somali community in Minnesota has a high prevalence of autism, and I know that because I serve a lot of minorities in my centers. So when these centers started popping up, I thought, good for them. You know, like I took care of my son. We have had a waiting list for 5 years, so I thought it was a positive. And then it just started to go and go, where now it's, 400 plus of these. And it started to, I didn't Nick Shirley it, that's a verb now. And go out and go see, because obviously I'm busy and that's not what I have time for. But, I think there were a lot of early warning signs. I think if anybody was actually paying attention.
They would have caught it.
Oh, 100%.
Because how long have you been in business? 20 years, is it?
Over 20 years.
And you went through a number of audits, I think, every year, right?
Every year.
So how is it that these groups are getting away with it, and you're under the thumb of the government auditing you every year? Why do you think that is?
Either there's a double standard and they don't, for whatever reason, have the same expectations that we do.
Maybe you're not a registered Democrat or a Somalian.
Mr. Shirley, now I guess investigative journalists are known as right-wing social media influencers. So can you confirm how many daycare centers you personally visited in Minnesota during your investigation?
During that first video, we went to around 7.
How did you select those facilities? I know you said earlier footprints in the snow, but how was it that you identified those facilities to go to initially?
So the man David in the video, he had the daycares with the CCAP funding, and we just simply drove around Minnesota and around Minneapolis area.
It took a lot of courage to do that, I would imagine. Probably more so now than what it was when you initially did it. 100 million views, you said.
Yes, over 140 million views on X.
So what was Mr. David's background? How did you connect with him, and how did he call you, or did you reach out?
He simply is just a man in Minnesota who has a passion for his city, and he's been seeing fraud taking place for years. And out of all the thousands of messages I get on Instagram and other platforms, I just happened to read his, and he provided me the information, so I gave him a phone call.
And then from there, just went to those different facilities. What was probably the most interesting thing as you were doing this? I think I saw the video. We watched it, and it looked like it was.
That reminds me, I said Obama, I blame you for the Somalians, but just for the record, Bush brought more than Obama. So it's not solely a Democrat thing.
A number of facilities in the same building.
Yes. So in one building, there was, I believe, 3 daycares, and there was no children. And they were all receiving CCAP funding for separate daycares. There was one daycare we went to that one day it was closed by the government, and then that same day it was reopened underneath another name. And they both received CCAP funding.
I bet, Ms. Larson, they probably weren't getting audited nearly like you were.
I would guess not.
So how many daycares are there in Minneapolis we think are fraudulent right now? Mr. Shirley, any idea? Or the amount of money total? You get any idea on that?
Well, they've frozen over $185 million, and not a single business has been able to prove that they're a legitimate business yet.
It's $185 million for sure that we know. Mr. Dexter, I got a question for you. What common patterns or warning signs usually indicate that the provider or the program may be committing fraud? As you were doing your investigations and 28 years of experience, what are some of the indicators that you see that maybe that should be a telltale sign or a red flag that there's fraud there?
Well, one of the immediate signs that we saw when we would go out to first look at the location is where that was located. A lot of times they were located in commercial areas. And I'm not talking like strip malls or anything like that. I'm talking about like industrial areas where you wouldn't typically find a child care center. We would notice that there was no play area, and if there was any play equipment, it was bare minimum. Now, there was an exception that if there was a playground area within a very short walking distance, that would count. But a lot of times we didn't see that. But the most glaring thing was that when we watched the centers, we would sit and watch it for a couple of days before we even put up surveillance cameras. We would watch, and we would see little to no children present. If anything, there would be a few kids.
As you begin to blow the whistle, the investigator became
Gentleman's time has expired.
I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. McBath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When he began his second term, President Trump broke from historic norms and fired 17 inspectors general, people who serve as critical
blah, 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 Trump. Don't pay attention to what's really happening. Let's talk about Trump, blah, blah, blah. Sickening.
In your experience, wouldn't you also say that that is the typical method or atypical method for beginning and analyzing a potential fraud case of any nature in any community?
Yes, because in order to do the investigation, you first have to find out if it warrants an investigation and to what extent that investigation would be.
And now, isn't it also correct? You mentioned in your testimony systemic weaknesses that allowed the large-scale fraud, even after you had developed substantial evidence that there was, in fact, fraud occurring. That there were institutional and systemic barriers that prevented you from successfully moving these cases through prosecution. And indeed, in your testimony, you note that in 2019, you chose to retire because the process had become so constrained that meaningful work was no longer possible. Tell us about the barriers and ultimately that profound frustration that led you to retire.
Well, when we were originally hired, when this unit was originally created and we were hired with the understanding that our job was going to be to investigate fraud and stop it. And as we proceeded through with that, it wasn't by our doing that it turned out that the centers we investigated were predominantly Somali. But once that was kind of brought out to light, the roadblocks that were put in front of us, being called racist, being called before these boards to be investigated. And basically it wound up turning us into auditors. We wound up just simply reviewing attendance records and matching them up with billing. There really wasn't a lot of substantial investigation anymore, and most of our cases wound up going before administrative hearings rather than criminal.
Which is...
Did you hear what he said? They put up roadblocks and kind of sweep it under the rug. It became administrative hearings instead of criminal. And they moved him to a desk job that was basically administrative. That to me says that that's where I would start my investigation, honestly. We gotta make examples out of these people, man.
And basically it wound up turning us into auditors. We wound up just simply reviewing attendance records and matching them up with billing. There really wasn't a lot of substantial investigation anymore, and most of our cases wound up going before administrative hearings rather than criminal.
Which in the end allowed this pattern of conduct to continue to occur, did it not?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yield.
Colleague from Florida, thank you for that line of questioning. I'm going to pick up where she left off. In regard to the testimony that we've heard today, the other side of the aisle makes us believe, or wants us to believe, that the fraud has been effectively stopped, that they aggressively pursued it, they prosecuted it, and that it is under control. Is that your interpretation of where we are, Mr. Dexter?
I believe the fraud is still going on. I don't think anything has changed from what I've seen with Mr. Shirley's videos. I'm seeing in his videos the exact same things that we were seeing back from 2014 to 2019 when I worked there.
And it's astounding to me when I was looking at some of the footage, the evidence. There was almost a sense of, we are owed this money that we're stealing. How dare you investigate us? Did you ever encounter that type of attitude when you were performing these investigations?
There was an underlying attitude like that, that we were taking away their money and that it wasn't fair to them.
In your investigation, sir, was the fraud as obvious as it seems to me that it appeared in the videos and the other evidence that I reviewed?
My opinion is you owe us. We removed you from your trashy country and gave you a chance, and then you screwed us over.
Direct line of sight to the centers, all their accesses. A lot of that, because of the location where we were in these industrial, commercial areas, meant we had to go to businesses and ask them permission. And the number one comment they made was, oh, you mean that daycare center over there where there's no children? So everyone else around it saw it.
In regards to your investigation, sir, I'm assuming that you did not just investigate daycare fraud. What other types of fraud did you investigate?
No, our function was strictly child care fraud, but
Okay.
some of that overlapped into, even though we didn't investigate it, a lot of it was also tied into the medical transportation. And
Did you ever investigate single entities that were appearing as though they were committing fraud in multiple avenues?
I'm sorry, can you say?
So it was like, was there one facility that was a daycare? It was also associated with the medical transport. Were there people who were double dipping in the fraud in your investigations?
Not that we saw as far as different organizations, but there were where one daycare center owner owned multiple daycare centers. So what we saw was more within the daycare center.
Yep. Ms. Larson, thank you for being here. I echo my colleague's sentiment from Alabama. Your son is very impressive. What's his name?
His name is Caden.
Caden, thank you for being here today. You look sharp. You're doing great. Let me just talk to you about these various audits that you were subjected to. How rigorous were they?
Very. They'd be there for hours, come in and say, I want to see these files for these kids at this date and this time.
Was there any way that you could have tricked them, concealed it? If you had not had any children there, would it have been possible?
Absolutely not.
In regards to the services that you've rendered, first, thank you.
Thank you.
And then in terms of the budgets that you require, how does it make you feel when you hear firsthand accounts that hundreds of millions of dollars have been taken out of the country in suitcases to hostile nations?
I can't even respond the way I feel about that, but I will say it's still happening. To the questioning there's only 2 autism centers that have actually been shut down of all of these that are going on. So what they're doing is this prepayment review and putting us through this AI system at Optum to look for suspicious claims, which is why our funds are being held. And it's not going to work. I'm going to tell you, it's not going to work. They just need to do what Nick did. Go and see that there's no kids there. Go and check it out.
And what Mr. Dexter did. Data-driven review.
Yeah.
Without any preconceptions, without any prejudices, and then holding the fraudsters to account. And when he did that, he was called a racist.
Yeah.
It's astounding. It is astounding. And you said that you help many patients, diverse patients.
Yeah.
How have those patients been harmed by this administration in Minnesota, the Walz administration?
They are all being harmed if I shut down next week.
Is that what you're up against?
Well, if I haven't gotten paid now, the last date of service was December 5th. I'm over $400,000 in debt. My payroll's $250,000 every 2 weeks, and we get paid every 2 weeks. So on Sunday night, I'll know if I get any money. I haven't been paid a dime. All my claims have been held. So I'm preparing to. And apparently in Minnesota too, I can't just pause services. If I pause my services, then the DHS can say, I'm sorry, you've lost your license to serve the kids through this program. So I don't know what they think we're supposed to do.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for being here. I appreciate all the testimony. Sorry I didn't get to everybody else. There's a lot of questions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields.
I wanted to also ask you a couple of questions about your work, because you have extensive experience on the law enforcement side trying to detect fraud. That's actually how in California we discovered the EDD fraud, the unemployment fraud, is it wasn't the state suddenly figuring it out. It was district attorneys who came together and investigated and in fact pointed to the fact that the state had let this happen and failed to heed their warnings and hadn't taken basic fraud detection steps. So is this something that you encounter? Like, what kind of internal controls make it so fraud is more difficult, and what type of lack of internal controls make it so fraud is easier?
Well, I would say the biggest thing was the fact that when we tried to investigate this, once we started bringing cases forward and it showed that the number of centers that we investigated were Somali, the biggest roadblock was the fact that they didn't want to follow through on these cases. They shut down investigations. They made us, in light of the report from this outside management firm, we spent nearly a year pulled away from our investigations because one of the things they determined was that when our unit started, we didn't have a proper case management system for recording and keeping track of the tips. So as investigators, we instead had to spend nearly a year entering past complaints made to DHS into a newly created database.
Did you hear what he said? Another smokescreen, another stall tactic from the higher ups. Crazy, man.
We couldn't do our investigation.
Yeah. So the states that make fraud detection a priority have less fraud than those that actively contravene efforts like yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Recognize the ranking member, Ms. McBath, for some uses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article Republicans claim.
So let's end with that. What I'm saying is the Democrat Party is not what it used to be. It got infiltrated, I'm thinking, 10 to 12, 14 years ago. Maybe longer, I don't know. But the Democratic Party that's in there now is full of Muslims, people that are not even from this country, that should not be serving. I believe that to serve a political office, you should be born in this country. And the people that are coming over here now mean no good to this country. They mean to do this country harm. They want to see nothing short of it falling, or they want to see a civil war. They want to see us fighting against each other, and that's what's going to happen. It's happening now. But I can tell you right now, the people that are getting ripped off, the citizens that are paying their taxes and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, we're damn sick and tired of it. You can scream racism all you want. You know, racism was almost a thing of the past until Obama got in there, and then it stirred up again. So, I don't get it, man. People are going to have to be held accountable at some point. Just because you have money, or just because you're into politics, or whatever, it's not right. I just thank God that he's using Donald Trump to kind of straighten some things out. I know the left hate it. They're bought and paid for, just like the media, old school media, legacy media. They'll soon be a thing of the past as well. And I hope I live long enough to see these people pay for what they did, from stealing elections to false imprisonment to embezzling money. It's damn time that they pay.